Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Jane DeMarinis, and I'm the Executive Director of Climate Diet. I have a couple of slides to show you, but the first thing I want to say is Happy Earth Day to everybody. We have, I think, bad news and good news on the climate. And we have an illustrious group of speakers today. Thank you all for joining us, our speakers, and we have many illustrious attendees as well. And thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to jump into a few slides here. Can everybody see these? I'm sharing my screen. Are you able to see the slides? Well, I'm talking about the power of food, and a lot of what we're talking about nowadays is related to food and the climate. And I think that is good news that more people are aware of the impact of what they eat on the climate. And that is the mission of Climate Diet. We started off with the idea that we want people to be more aware that what you eat has more to do with your health. It has also to do with the climate. So let's talk about some of the bad news.
We don't see any slides,
2024 was the hottest year on record.
We can't see your slides, so you need to share the slides in.
So thank you, Mac. 2024, we hit all kind of records. It was the hottest year on record. We hit the 1.6 degrees centigrade, passing the threshold set by the Paris Agreement. We had increased frequency of dangerous heat days, an average of 41 additional days of dangerous heat. These are terrible. People are dying in countries that may lack air conditioning for everybody. The Antarctic heat wave, ice melt, sea level rise, these were all actions that happened, responses to the heat, changing the climate. Some islands disappeared in the Pacific. The record low Antarctic sea ice was the lowest in 45 years from the satellite records. On a United States level, we had the wildfires in Los Angeles. Those were largely impacted from the lack of rain, dry seasons, turning forests and trees into tinder, and when they were hit by lightning or other flammable substances, turned into huge fires, destroying entire neighborhoods. And just one final thing I'll point out is the Atlantic Ocean current, the Gulf Stream, is weakening due to climate change, and that could lead to further alterations in weather patterns that are considered certainly dangerous. Could you go to the next slide, Mac?
Yep, I'm on the next slide.
So some of the things that we are focused on at Climate Diet is to outreach and educate more people and advocate for programs that are healthy. We reach out through the media and participate with the Society of Environmental Journalists. They send us research. We share research we have with them and other media. We also have partnerships with organizations that are similar, like Sailesh Rao's Climate Healers, and share speakers we found from his programs. Thank you, Sailesh, and his research. We also participate in a program locally with Montgomery County Public School Systems. We're teaching a program called Power of Food that's been endorsed, and we got grants from our county to do this program in the schools. So we're happy about that, starting with young people. And we try to share documentaries and other things that make it easy for students to understand. And in terms of advocacy, our Congressman Jamie Raskin, he's promoted some vegetarian food options in federal facilities. So we've supported him in trying to promote awareness of that. So slide number 5 is an interesting little video that is, Mac, you'll have to hit the button at the bottom, I think, for it to activate. But it's, this is a video that's actually at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's showing the global temperature change from 1850 to 2024. And it's an odd thing to see in a museum, but it shows you how art and science are connecting in a new way. So the next slide. So carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide concentrations are now more abundant in the Earth's atmosphere than any time in the last 800,000 years. It's alarming, but that's where we're at, and we have to recognize that and spread the word on that so people will pay more attention to this issue. Climate change is also affecting whole countries. Saudi Arabia has been viewed as potentially uninhabitable in the future from global warming. The heat waves there exceeded 200 days per year, so more than half the year. A Brazilian rainforest, the sunny portions of the rainforest have reached 171 degrees Fahrenheit. Certainly no people can withstand that temperature for more than a nanosecond. Next slide. The Washington Post talked about the Amazon rainforest and basically talked about devouring the rainforest. So what is being done there, the cutting down the rainforest, getting rid of all the trees that took away carbon dioxide, is for growing meat, raising cattle and raising the food for the cattle. So that certainly what we eat is being impacted. The United States are the biggest meat eaters in the world. Next slide. So here's a chart showing more specifically greenhouse gas emissions from food. And at the very top, the biggest line is beef. So red meat is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Down at the bottom of that chart are vegetables, peas, bananas, and most of the meat you see in the top half. So it's illustrative of where we have to go when we think about what we eat and the greenhouse gases from that. And of course, the beef is also from the food that they eat, a huge amount of food needed. Next slide. Again, this is talking about animal agriculture, and the UN report on climate change had this in their report for 2022, and that's that 80% of all agricultural land in the world is used for animal agriculture, either the food for livestock or the land, so grazing and the food for livestock, but it's only producing 20% of the food that the world needs. So it's very inefficient and it's not sustainable. Next slide. So again, I mentioned that we created a toolkit for Montgomery County schools, and we're working with the school systems to try to just educate the younger population about climate change and the relationship to what they eat. And we appreciate that Montgomery County recognized the importance of this topic to share it in the schools in our county. We have a cooking demo later from Erin. She's going to show some plant-based recipe. Next slide. And we try to get our message out in a variety of ways, like our webinar today and newsletters. We put out weekly recipes that show how many greenhouse gas emissions are saved by eating plant-based. Those are some of the things that we do. We're also talking to community and professional groups. Next slide. This is our newsletter, Food is Climate. Next slide. And these are recipes that we put out showing, again, the recipes are shown, but also how many greenhouse gas emissions are saved by eating a plant-based recipe, showing your impact. And anybody that wants these can go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get the recipes every Friday. So we invite you to do that. So we try to also teach when we can how to make these recipes. Sometimes we do this for schools or community groups. Next slide. And we try to use graphics like these to show students and adults their carbon footprint and how much less it is, almost more than half less if you're eating plant-based over a meat eater. Next slide. There's a big feeling in the country that fossil fuels are the big greenhouse gas emitters, and that is really not so true. And one of our speakers, Gerard Bisshop, will be talking about that. So let's just move on to the next slide. This is our board of directors. Some of them are here today. Just want to thank them for participating with us in our advisory committee. Sailesh Rao, Dr. O'Shea. So we really appreciate you being here to share your knowledge with everybody here. Dr. David Blockstein is a partner. He is the co-director of Climate Justice Education Week, so we appreciate his partnership as well in educating students. His group educates at the college level, so thank you. These are some of our partners. Next slide. So this is ending on, my last slide is just ending on positive note. A recent survey tallying vegans and vegetarians showed that 46% of people's, it was broader than just vegan and vegetarians. They're a small part of the population still, but 46% of people surveyed said they were planning to reduce meat consumption. And another 45% said they were going to reduce dairy. I think this survey was done by Rutgers. Pew Charitable Trust also did a similar one. Next slide. And this is a proverb, a Native American proverb that I think is good for us to think about. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. So thank you for your attention. And let's go on to our first speaker, Dr. Janet O'Shea. So welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Jane. Happy Earth Day, everyone. It's an honor to be presenting as part of this distinguished panel. You'll be hearing shortly about the science of animal agriculture's impact on the environment and about the politics of meat production. So I won't dwell on those issues for long. And instead, I'm going to talk about something that pertains to my area of interest and specialization, which is the structure of activism. And I'm particularly interested today in offering some thoughts about this as it relates to efforts to counter climate breakdown, especially in the arena of food. In particular, I'd like to share some thoughts about some false dichotomies in environmental thinking and activism. So by this point, most environmental organizations recognize the impact that animal agriculture has on climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean dead zones, desertification, water usage and supply, and so on. However, as soon as this is acknowledged, it's often followed up with something like, well, we recognize that animal agriculture and meat production has a huge impact on the environment, but remember, individual action is not enough to stave off environmental disaster. This assertion contains within it several false assumptions. One, the assumption that it's impossible to get large numbers of people to change their behavior at once. Two, that behavior change happens in isolation. Three, that behavior change and systemic change are at odds. And four, that veganism, vegetarianism, flexitarianism are only about and can only ever be about individual dietary choices. So here's why these assumptions are wrong. That behavior change can't happen in large numbers. Well, as my co-panelist, Dr. Sailesh Rao, has pointed out, anybody who thinks that you can't get large numbers of people to make behavior change at once is not thinking enough about what Mohandas Gandhi achieved in the Indian nationalist movement, specifically through the Khadi movement. So the Khadi movement was an effort on behalf of Indian independence activists to get the populace to reject the purchasing of British cloth and to instead spin and wear their own cotton. So this was crucial to the Indian independence movement. In fact, it's the shift from British cloth to khadi is often credited with destabilizing the entire British Empire. So clearly, behavior change can make a difference. But even more generally, people taking individual action and making behavior change at once in community and in sync with each other, that's precisely what a boycott is. And we know that boycotts have had a huge influence over the course of activist history. As to the idea that behavior change has to happen in isolation, in reality, behavior change never happens in a vacuum. We influence others and they influence us. And we can see the negative effect of this. Jane just showed a slide saying that vegans represent 3% of the US population, vegetarians represent 4%. Part of the reason why these numbers appear so low is that a lot of people try reducing their meat consumption or eliminating it, and then they go back to their old way of eating. And the research suggests they do this because of a lack of social support. So we know that this can work in a negative effect, that the behavior of others can influence us. But we can also see that this can happen in a positive sense. And in addition, that influence doesn't just have to be person to person, but we can actually influence the institutions that we're part of. And I'll revisit that shortly. The idea that behavior change and systemic change are at odds is also a peculiar one. There's this idea that behavior change is somehow a distraction, that it can be an excessive or almost obsessive focus on minute actions. But recent research suggests that even though this has been sort of the received wisdom of environmental activism for a few decades now, that behavior change is a distraction. In fact, it's not the case. That individual action sets the stage for policy change. It normalizes taking action against environmental degradation, and it encourages other people to take the climate crisis seriously. So if we consider an example from the advocacy against fossil fuel usage, we'll kind of see perhaps that the idea that individual action is a distraction, we can see how spurious it is. No one ever suggests that riding a bicycle distracts from advocacy for safer streets or for cities that are less fossil fuel dependent. In fact, we tend to assume like, oh, of course, the people advocating for bike lanes are going to be the cyclists. And those bike lanes might make our cities less carbon dependent and safer and more efficient, but we also assume that it does take the effort of people getting on those bicycles and riding them. Whereas when it comes to food, somehow we question that assumption, and I think that's problematic. The idea that veganism, vegetarianism, flexitarianism are only individual dietary choices is likewise problematic. There's a reason why we have that assumption. Part of it is about the history of vegetarianism. It's been associated with various religious traditions, with spiritual practices, efforts at improving mental clarity and fitness. In addition, within a capitalist system, what we purchase is how we express our agency. So there's this idea, I think, particularly in the United States and elsewhere in the global north, that our food choices, my food choices are my right. They're just about me individually. But if we look at the development of modern veganism, and actually if we look at its historical antecedents, back in the global north, going back at least a few centuries, in Asia going back through the Ahimsa traditions, we see this idea that actually the efforts to abstain from meat are also part of a social movement. And if anything, these efforts remind us that our food choices are political. So we might want to just take a moment to consider why these assumptions are at play in the first place. Why do we have this idea that reducing our meat consumption is really just almost a form of virtue signaling? Well, one thing has to do with the difference between the fossil fuel and the animal agriculture industries. The fossil fuel industry has spent years encouraging personal responsibility for the climate crisis. We've probably all heard this idea by now that the carbon footprint was invented by fossil fuel companies. Incidentally, the fossil fuel companies, when they were encouraging us to think about our carbon footprint, were still encouraging pretty incremental changes. You know, they weren't saying, for example, get rid of your car, stop flying completely, live in a smaller home. But instead, they were saying things like, oh, purchase energy efficient light bulbs. In addition, at the very same time that the fossil fuel industry was encouraging personal responsibility and encouraging individual actions, the meat industry was doing exactly the opposite, and they were discouraging individual action. So there was a somewhat recent publication by Jennifer Joquette and Loredana Loy showing exactly this, looking at meat industry documentation and showing that there was a concerted effort to debunk any kind of effort towards the reduction of meat was going to have an impact on the environment. In addition, a recent Guardian article reflected on the response to the release of the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet Guidelines. Those were produced in 2019, and they were recommending a reducitarian diet framework, focused significantly on meat reduction, particularly red meat, and on a significant increase in the consumption of legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables. And there was a huge backlash against the release of these diet guidelines. The Guardian recently uncovered that backlash was almost entirely engineered by an animal agriculture funded PR company, by one PR company. So when polluting industries discourage something, we can probably surmise that that something is effective. In addition, another reason why this assumption is at play, like, oh, our choices aren't going to make a difference, is because of climate doomism. And we've seen more of this in recent years. It's too late. There's nothing we can do. And again, that idea, it's a compelling one. It's a serious problem that we're facing. But the widespread circulation of that idea has been assisted by the polluting industries, because if we give up, then there's less of a challenge to their profit margins. So the key point here is that the fossil fuel industries and the animal agriculture industries are structured quite differently. There's a limit to how much consumer efforts can influence fossil fuel usage, because even if I turn down the AC or the thermostat at home, or even if I ride a bike or drive an electric car, so much of our fossil fuel usage happens in contexts where we don't control that fossil fuel usage. So things like schools, workplaces, public facilities. Whereas when we make a change to our dietary patterns, that change carries with us, regardless of what context we're in. The subsidy system, of course, does mute market signals, but it doesn't override them completely. And we can bump up the effect of our individual dietary practices with campaigns like Greener by Default, Default Veg, Plant-Based by Default, and so on. So this gets to the next question, which is, what can we do to challenge these assumptions? Because as important as it is to make individual changes and to encourage others to make those individual changes, we do in fact need systemic change. And part of that is recognizing that these behavior changes are transferable and transmissible. And that entails rejecting that idea that they don't make a difference. So what can we do about it? Well, one thing is that we can identify our behavior change as a boycott. So instead of saying, for example, oh, well, I don't eat meat because I care about animals or workers or the environments, to phrase it differently and to say, well, I reject animal products because it is an economic boycott of an unjust system. We can also participate in efforts towards systemic change, things like changing the subsidy system. That can be part of our advocacy, and our individual choices can be part of living the truth that informs that advocacy. We can advocate towards changing the dietary guidelines, pursuing options like what they've done in Denmark with chef training, menu and choice architecture, and enhancing both supply and demand. We can also articulate the relationship of behavior change to larger struggles to create a more just food system. So we can think about veganism, vegetarianism, flexitarianism as being about connecting the dots between animal exploitation, the exploitation of human workers, the rise of zoonotic disease, degenerative disease, food oppression, food insecurity, climate breakdown, and other forms of environmental crisis. We can focus on how our behavior change dovetails with an organized coalitional movement to bring about a kinder, more just food system. And at the crux of it, there is little that would be more of a systemic change than that. Thank you, and I shall now hand over to Gerard.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. That was a really interesting talk. And the one thing that I got out of that was that from now on, I'll be talking to my friends saying, I eat vegan because I'm boycotting cruelty. So, yeah, that's way more powerful. I love it. Thank you. The other thing I'd like to say is that change happens very, very, very slowly, as Jonathan Foley says. He's the head of Drawdown. And then all at once. So that's what's happening here. I fully believe. And there are signs of it happening already, but it makes our role, the influence role, way more important because people are going to have to know what to do when we all change. So we're going to be in hot demand. So okay, here's my presentation. Some recent research. This is hot off the press, by the way. The second paper came out last month, and these two papers, one in October last year, and this one, reframe what we think we know about what human activities have caused climate change. So I've got a short presentation, and I'll just bring that up. So I hope you can see that there. Okay, so
we can see it.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I bumped something. So this work focuses on that really, really, really interesting topic of accounting. I mean, people hear the accounting word and their eyes glaze over. But it appears that dodgy accounting has totally skewed our understanding of what causes global warming that we now experience. So this work corrects that. This is the first paper on consistent accounting, came out in October last year. And what it showed was that the two main sources of carbon dioxide, if you ask anyone in the street what is causing climate change, they'll say carbon dioxide from fossil fuels.
Red, we are seeing your notes also.
Okay, how do I? Perhaps I took the wrong share. Yeah, it's my two desktops that are getting in the way.
I think it was fine.
Yeah, please excuse the notes. Yeah, we'll just have to deal with that. It's the second screen that's showing the full screen. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so the way they're counted, the carbon dioxide from fossil fuels and the carbon dioxide from land clearing are counted very differently. How did that happen? I don't know. Okay, so what the paper says is let's measure them the same way. Let's determine that carbon dioxide from fossil fuels and carbon dioxide from deforestation both affect the climate in the same way. In fact, what happens is when we release CO2, most of it right now, 2/3 of it is soaked up by growing vegetation. Not just soaked up, sunk. It's not part of a cycle, it's sunk away. So this is what they reason. They reason that it's just the amount that's in the atmosphere that affects the climate. Therefore, for land clearing, let's just take the amount that's in the atmosphere, and that's the net of the accounting. Whereas for fossil fuels, they said, oh, it's the whole emission we should count, not only what's left in the atmosphere. So that's gross accounting. What my paper does is say we should use consistent accounting, either net or gross. It doesn't matter actually to the calculations, but let's do it the same way. So that's what happens. Land clearing has emitted more carbon dioxide than fossil fuels when measured consistently. Isn't that amazing? Land clearing has emitted more than fossil fuels. So therefore, the industries that use extensive areas of land that used to be forest become the heavy emitters. And this is what the second paper is all about. The second paper uses two more things. It uses a new measure of comparing different gases called effective radiative forcing. Sorry for the long names, but it's the best science we have that tells us what gases have caused what warming. And secondly, we have also, this is dodgy accounting once more. We're advocating inclusive accounting. We include everything, heating and cooling. Up until now, the cooling emissions have been largely ignored. So let's include them. If we're going to do a proper accounting, let's include them. So that's these are the three things that totally change the landscape on our understanding of what human activities are causing climate change. We use consistent carbon accounting. We use effective radiative forcing. This is the best science we have now. And we use inclusive accounting, include the cooling. So those three things, when put together, make a huge difference. The other thing we do is we use data that is the best we've got. We now have time series data of 11 different gases, emissions, going back to 1750. We have yearly emissions data for land, gross and net as well. So we have a full suite of data now. You know, it's being refined, it's getting better, but we have a full suite of emissions data, cooling and heating. And we also have this measure, which is effective radiative forcing, which I've mentioned. And this is published by the IPCC in their last assessment. Their sixth assessment showed the the emissions-based effective radiative forcing of each of the gases, in fact, 11 different gases. So there's carbon dioxide, there's methane, nitrous oxide, halocarbons, nitrogen oxides, etc. And these ones here, this line is the heating cooling line. So there's heating on the right-hand side. On the left is cooling. So all of these coolings emissions, these are the aerosols that are emitted. If you go to a big industrial city, you'll see a grey smog. And that smog is aerosols emitted when we burn fossil fuels. Now that reflects the sun's rays very strongly. And up until now, it's prevented nearly a degree of warming. So this is the latest science and the latest data. So no one can argue this interpretation. It's not my data. It's using other data. It's using ERS from the IPCC. No one can argue those things. So using effective radiative forcing, had we calculated methane's warming using the metric that we use now, which is a thing called global warming potential, which a lot of people argue about. That's why you hear a lot of arguments about. If we, rather than using that, if we use this effective radiative forcing, we find that methane has produced 3 times more warming than we thought. So methane has actually produced half of the warming we now experience. This is a major, major thing, because what it means is that policy can now look hard-headed at what is causing climate change. So if methane, to me, it's number one, then that is the issue that we really need to be looking at if we need to tackle climate change. And also these cooling emissions, as I said, they've balanced, they've offset, they've stopped nearly a degree of warming. So if we include those in the mix, we find this. Now, this is a graph. This is in the paper, the last paper. We've got heating above the line and cooling below the line. And fossil fuels produce a lot of heating, but they also produce a lot of cooling. Agriculture produces mostly heating, very little cooling. And that blue part there is the albedo. When you cut trees down mostly in the snow in the high latitudes, that reflects more sunshine. So cutting trees down with snow on the ground or ice, it reflects sunshine. So that's called albedo change. We included that as well. So we've got every little bit of data that we could possibly put into the mix. And you see here that the black dots here represent the net warming. So fossil fuels net warming is there. Agriculture's net warming is way up here. Agriculture caused 60% of global warming. Within that, animal agriculture caused 53%, and fossil fuels caused 18%. So that's animal agriculture there. So animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. And the 3 reasons for this are that deforestation carbon has been underestimated by a factor of 3. That's huge. Methane's heating has been underestimated by a factor of 3. That's huge. And cooling aerosols are just not counted. And that's also huge. Put that together, and I've mentioned data. We've got the latest and the greatest. Put that together, and you find that agriculture has caused 60% of current global warming, and fossil fuels have caused 18% of current global warming. Of course, there's a caveat here in that the cooling aerosols that have prevented further warming, they're being cleaned up. Europe did it decades ago. North America did it decades ago. They cleaned their skies. And now we're cleaning up the dirtiest of all, which is the shipping emissions. And also Asia is concentrating on aerosols. So as we clean up the nasty aerosols, they cause a lot of health and problems, and also they suppress crop growth as well. So as we clean those up, we're going to expose more warming from fossil fuels. So that's the caveat. This is a measure as at 2020. By the end of the century, that unless we draw down that carbon dioxide, which we can, unless we do that, fossil fuels by the end of the century will be the major contributor to global warming by then. But right now, animal agriculture is the greatest cause of the climate change we now experience. Also, I've been questioned on, well, what about current emissions? Shouldn't we also measure agriculture or animal agriculture as a proportion of current emissions? And that's really interesting, because what we did is we did several sensitivity analyses with this data. And what I did was, rather than take the full period from 1750 to 2020, I took the last 10 years of emissions data and plug that into the humongous spreadsheets. And it works out that even using the emissions data for the last 10 years, agriculture is still the greater emission source than fossil fuels. It's about 43% to agriculture, 37% to fossil fuels. So that's not a very exact measurement. It's just a sensitivity analysis because we still use the effective radiative forcing over the entire period. We should really look at it over that decade, but it gives you a bit of an understanding. So even if you take the most recent emissions data, agriculture is still ahead of fossil fuels. So that sort of answers that question. And the other thing that's exposed, if you like, by this work is that by using net accounting for land clearing, we've effectively hidden the amount of drawdown. And that is a serious error. And that has limited in our understanding the strength of forests. At the moment, there's criticism in certain areas with big wildfires, etc. Some authors are saying, look, there's more emissions of carbon than there is drawdown. Alarm, alarm, alarm. But if you look at the global picture, you find that up until now, the forests mainly, actually the forests hold 90% of the above ground carbon. So forests are critical. Soils move very slowly. So the forests are the big thing. So up until now, forests mainly have locked up thousands of billions of tons of CO2. They've locked up 2/3 of all emissions, both from fossil fuels and from land clearing. So if you look at it in that sense, nature has upped its act. There's this thing called carbon dioxide fertilization. So what's happened is that the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, nature has stepped up. All the forests, all the vegetation is soaking up more and more and more carbon. So even though we've cut down half the trees on planet Earth, we've destroyed 3 trillion of the 6 trillion trees, even though we've cut down half, the trees that remain hold twice the amount of carbon than the original forests did due to carbon dioxide fertilization. So nature is working overtime. And it's not just a small amount, it's massive. So if you look at the entire period since 1750, nature has the vegetation and the oceans and the soil carbon have mopped up 3/4 of all carbon dioxide emissions, and in the last decade they've mopped up 2/3. So this nature is doing its best, but it's falling behind, right? And in fact, it's about 3 decades behind. So if we could just stop everything for 3 decades, nature would slurp it all up, and we'd have no more climate change to worry about. So that's the end of that presentation. So do we have time for questions, or have I gone over?
How about if we just hold the questions till after Sailesh? And
Okay.
if that's okay with you. And Chloe is up next. Welcome, Chloe Sorvino, who's written an amazing book called Raw Deal, The Corruption in the Meat Industry. That's not the exact title. You can clarify it, Chloe.
Gerard, wow, that was such a why. The fact that if we'd stopped in 3 decades, everything would regenerate. I mean, that's really something to think about. That's doable in a lifetime. But yeah, my name is Chloe Sorvino. I'm a journalist. I head up food coverage and agriculture coverage at Forbes, where I've worked for 11 years. And this is my book, Raw Deal: Hitting Corruption, Corporate Greed, and the Fight for the Future of Meat. And the paperback came out a few months ago. Their hard copy came out in 2022, but it really spans a decade of my work, reporting, and kind of going where very few other journalists have ever gone. I've gone to some of probably the most slaughterhouses of any working journalist today. I've seen it all. I've thrown out a lot of shoes in the process. And this book is really, it goes behind the scenes and investigates the why. And, as Jay was saying earlier, like this unjust system, it really kind of gives you evidence of all the different ways that the system is unjust and is working, for the billionaires and the corporate shareholders who, control these corporations at the end of the day and who are profiting off of this environmental desecration that we're talking about. I mean, I'm honored to be able to talk about this on Earth Day. I think everyone here is probably one of those folks that thinks, Earth Day is every day, and it should be. But I think it's a great opportunity to really get into some of the nitty-gritty of really how this works and why it's important, and just how violent these slaughterhouses can be, and how vulnerable the workers are that are working these tireless jobs day in and day out to feed not just Americans, but all over the world. This meat goes around the world and is leaving a horrendous environmental destruction in its wake. Everything from the dead zone in the Gulf, and so many other waterways, to air pollution, to even, we were talking about methane earlier with Gerard's presentation. And the afterword of my paperback really goes into how I even saw how Smithfield, America's largest pork producer, has been trying to capture methane with this kind of Band-Aid solution. It's like a kind of a bubble, essentially. And I was kind of dared by these folks to go up one, and it was a really eye-opening experience, because, I was standing on top of this massive bubble over this massive field of toxic slop, and it really was a metaphor for how we've been heading. If we don't do anything to change now, we will be in a situation of toxic slop everywhere, and it being the haves and the have-nots. And I really think, when we think about calls to action, working as a collective and thinking collectively is so important. And that's the way that our dollar can have and make change. The kind of one of the points of this book is that, I've talked with all the meat billionaires. I've been to their slaughterhouses. They aren't going to save us. In fact, they're the ones who are profiting off of this and not slowing down meat production, especially in the face of consumer shifting demand and shifting needs and wants and desires for more. But I think there's actually kind of a freedom in that, because once you realize that, billionaires and a handful of corporations are controlling what we have access to in the first place, and that kind of voting with their dollars is in a lot of ways a false messiah, you then can realize that, if we are supporting, we obviously all have to eat, we all have to buy food, we have to source food. And so there are ways to think collectively and think community. And that is the way to make that $1, your $1, actually make change and make an impact in a situation. Because, my dollar and a billionaire's dollar are never going to be the same. They're never going to have the same power. And it's important, I think, we recognize those systems when we're trying to make change. But so kind of with that, I can go into a bit just about the meat industry, how it's gotten so consolidated, and where it's going. But so my book goes, back through, 100 years or so of history in the meat industry. And, 100 years ago, the meat industry was nearly as consolidated as it is today, which is kind of crazy to think about, because around 100 years ago, there was, the breaking up of the meat packers, because they thought it was unlawful. Antitrust was a huge problem. Corruption was a huge problem. And that's what we've continued to see today, as after 100 years, this industry has reconsolidated so much. And so the beef industry, the top four, when you're thinking about consolidation, I'll say that, the Department of Justice typically says that, if the top four players own 25% of an industry, that's a significantly consolidated industry. So think about that with, in the beef sector, the top four players own 80 to 85% at least. In pork, it's over 70%. And in chicken, it's over 60%. It actually was 50% when I wrote the book originally, and there's been more consolidation. There's consolidation being driven further every day by some of the biggest players in this industry, which include, JBS, Tyson, Smithfield, Cargill, Purdue, Cook Foods, so many others. But those are the main ones we think about. And, this is important because, as we've been talking about this, there's all these different ways that these corporations have fought politically and spent millions and millions of dollars to make the laws and regulations easier on them and make it worse for the communities around production, make it worse for all of us eaters, make it worse for public health, for the environment around production and just across the globe. And so there's that, but there's also so much more. And so we've been, as these industries have gotten, a lot of consolidation has happened only in the past decade. And it's driven, the current outbreak of avian flu, egg prices rising, and so many other, really important impacts that people are feeling right now because people are hurting everywhere. Prices are through the roof for protein, but at the same time, many people are being pushed to consume more and more protein. It's these high protein trend, these diets have really, given the Tyson and JBSs of the world kind of a reason to say, no, we have to keep growing meat production. The meat demand is growing. And that's like one of these big industry kind of lies that I think consumers have to try to push back on. But, another way that the consolidation has created, kind of these really horrible implications for all, citizen eaters is the financial manipulation that has happened. There's been a lot of, because of, with all this consolidation, there's only a handful of players. These industries have contracted, right? And so because of that, there's been a lot of collusion. There's been allegations of price fixing, collusion across beef, pork, and chicken industries. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements in the past, decade or so, really the past 5 years mostly, but and they keep coming out. There's probably hundreds of more lawsuits and years more of litigation to go. And these price fixing allegations, are across groceries, consumers, fast food, McDonald's, Target, Costco, you name it, pretty much any major player in the food industry. And there's been class actions as well for just average consumers. But one of the things that my book went to, which was shocking and horrifying to me, was the financial manipulation of workers and how this consolidation has driven literal subjugation and collusion around workers and benefits and salaries and wages and time off, healthcare, all these sorts of extremely important things. And again, just to take a pause here, these workers are some of the most vulnerable in this country, and they're doing some of the most dangerous jobs in this country. There are refugees from dozens and dozens of countries, and immigrants and other folks from other vulnerable and marginalized communities that are working these jobs in these slaughterhouses. And, from the pandemic when they were being pushed to work on the line without PPE, many of them, to now when there is avian flu risk, antibiotic resistance risk, and line speeds speeding up to the point where, carpal tunnel and other injuries are even more prone and pronounced and possible. It's really serious, but my book goes into the specific allegations of how these HR managers and just different folks in the benefits offices would get together annually to literally try to make sure these workers were paid, as little as possible. But to the irony and kind of horrifyingness to me and so many readers, it's that, they were doing this while they were in Florida at their annual conference. There was one point, I'll never forget the part where there was a text thread that's in one of the lawsuits, and they're discussing if they should, have the annual meeting of all the HR managers on, a tiki tiki cruise or a dolphin cruise or, you know, a golf outing, you know, at the annual kind of chicken conference or egg conference. And that's just the way these industries have operated for decades. And I think it's really important to kind of understand that because we have to understand how these things structurally work before we can dismantle and change and create real change, real meaningful change. Because I guess what I'll say to wrap this up is that, you know, so many of these meat packers have been promoting change and pilots and test studies and trying to use lessons. Some of them aren't even, but a lot of them have been, at least for a while, we're trying to do pilots. These pilots are on tiny, tiny percentages of their total volume. I mean, nothing I've seen, and I've tried to see everything, you know, nothing I've seen has been remotely close to being sizable, substantial change. And in most places, you know, progress has been rolled back. I am horrified by how Tyson and others have followed suit to stop their kind of big pledge to use antibiotics, to be used no antibiotics in their chicken processing and production. That was done, you know, only 6 years before, so that they said they would do that to quell the chance of a massive public health problem outbreak. And yet now, you know, when their profits are receding and there are, you know, shareholders demanding more returns, antibiotics are back in play and in a way that's extremely harmful and, you know, putting us on a path towards an insecure food future. So I'll just say, you know, I think this is an issue that everyone can really get behind. Thinking collectively, thinking about community is the most important thing. At the end of the day, there are so many, you know, different issues with how we source food, and at the end of the day, also, you know, if you are hungry, full stop, everyone needs to eat, and that I think the blame is often put on the consumer, wrongfully so. We shouldn't feel guilty because at the end of the day, these billionaires and a few corporations are controlling what we have access to. And I think just to end on a call to action, I've loved everything that has said already. And one thing I like to add is that, you know, as citizen eaters, we can really make change. One, if you're excited about this, if you want to take that in your own hands and get on the ground floor of that, you know, one way to change very quickly is to think about institutions like public schools, hospitals, nursing homes, facilities that use public funding to source food. And one way would be to run for a local school board and try to make change in your local district with your local school kids and hopefully make that budget used to support a re-regionalized food system with healthy vegetables, sustainable vegetables, legumes, tubers, things that are regionally based. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be the regional community-based organizations that are there to save us, not the billionaires in their bunkers. Thanks.
Thank you, Chloe. And so good advice and great book, great research. So Sailesh, are you ready to join us and summarize and give some of your own comments from all the important research that you've done over the years and important advocacy as well?
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, everyone. It was mind-blowing to listen to all of you and the indictment of the animal agriculture industry that came out of those 4 talks that I heard. And I'm reminded of Dr. John McDougall, who said, animal foods are not our food. Animal foods are full of cholesterol, animal protein, and fat with no starch, dietary fiber, or other essential sugars for health. They're infiltrated with big doses of people-poisoning environmental chemicals and loads of infection-causing bacteria, parasites, and viruses. Why would you ever want to eat it? That's what he said. And here we are discussing how this entirely unnecessary industry producing a product that we really don't need to eat at all is causing all this problem on Earth, and we are wondering how to get rid of it. And how our children are being farmed by corporations to eat this food. Why are they being told to eat this food? There's another statistic that's very startling to me that I didn't hear today, but I will tell you. This is from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They did a survey, and they found that 90% of Americans believe that protein is only found in meat, and calcium is only found in dairy. Now, where did they get that? They obviously got it from school. This is what they were taught. So I looked up my granddaughter's textbooks, and sure enough, whenever the protein is discussed, they mention meat. Whenever calcium is discussed, they mention dairy. So they keep associating meat and protein, milk and calcium, and very soon, children begin to believe that meat is only found in protein. I mean, protein is only found in meat, and calcium is only found in milk, because that's always linked like that, okay, in textbooks. So I started looking at, okay, a system that is so far out of whack is driving us over a cliff, an ecological cliff, and it's urgent. The earth is screaming at us saying, take action. This is not going to last. We have already exceeded 1.5 degrees for a couple of years. Okay. Now, they will tell you at the IPCC that the 1.5 degrees that they agreed to was an average over 7 years. So they say, wait another 7 years for you to do the average. But Jim Hansen has said, it's not going to go down below 1.5, folks. It's already exceeded it, and it's not going to go down. Okay? So we know we have exceeded it. And are we going to wait another 5 years before we make decisions? Are we going to continue to let corporations lie to our children in school textbooks? We know how they're doing it. So why don't we now figure out how to get the science teachers to tell children that protein is found in all plant foods? All plant foods have all amino acids. How do we know this? We measured it in the lab. There is a University of Minnesota database with 11,000 plant foods listing all the amino acids in those 11,000 plant foods. And there is not a single plant food that's missing any one of the amino acids. This is from a paper that Chris Gardner wrote in 2019. Okay? And you can go look that up. So we know this. Science teachers ought to know this. So why are they using this ploy to con children? You know, congratulations, you know how to con children. Is that what we need to continue doing? Do we need to let corporations farm our children so that they can mine their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health for profit? Is that what an education system is intended for? To make them customers for the pharmaceutical industry, customers for the meat industry, customers for the fast food industry? So we have to now take action as parents, as grandparents, locally, demanding from our schools that they teach children the truth. That if you eat enough calories, you will get enough calcium. This is not me saying it. This is Dr. John McDougall saying it. Okay? And there's plenty of foods with more calcium than milk. There are plenty of foods with less calcium than milk. But if you eat enough calories on a natural diet, you'll get enough calcium. You don't have to worry about it. So I am a systems engineer, and I analyze why people behave the way they behave. Why are the systems behaving like this? And it comes down to foundational flaws. So I believe that change is not going to happen by tweaking the system. I actually believe in Deborah Fries's two loops theory of change, where she said, big systems, especially living systems, can never be changed from within. You can only abandon them and start over. So I've written a book called There is a Planet B. Okay, there is a Planet B. And it basically says that we are already working on a different set of foundational truths and a system based on those foundational truths, as opposed to the 4 foundational myths of Planet A. Planet A has 4 foundational myths. Protein is only found in animal foods. Calcium is only found in dairy foods, number 2. Number 3, human well-being necessitates endless economic growth. And this is drilled into people's heads in schools. Why is that drilled into people's heads? Because they're running a Ponzi scheme, folks. That's what the billionaires are doing. They're running a Ponzi scheme, and if it doesn't grow, it collapses on them. So we know that. So that's the third myth. Even countries that are consuming at 4 to 5 times what the earth can support are still trying to grow their economy. And the fourth myth is that fossil fuel use is a leading cause of climate change. And I watched this myth being created. I was there from the beginning, watching it being created. Because right during the first training at Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, I asked him the question, if we restore forests on the land we are currently using for animal agriculture, can we not reverse climate change? And I was doing back-of-the-envelope calculations, saying that, land has 3 times as much carbon as the atmosphere. Atmosphere has 30% more carbon than it used to. So 1/3 of the land is being used for grazing, on which there is hardly any carbon. So if we restore the forest, why can't we reverse this? And he immediately turned to Roy Neal, his chief of staff, and he said, how did this guy get in here? And he didn't answer my question. Okay? So then we wrote a letter to him. And he replied back to us saying, it's not as important as you think, but I'm looking into it. So we have the letters in Glenn Mercer's book, Food is Climate. So I have the original letters that I wrote and Al Gore's reply as well in Food is Climate. So then I waited. I said, all right, maybe he knows more than I do. Let me wait and analyze some more. And at that time, Goodland and Anhang wrote a paper saying that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 51% of greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. That came out in 2009. When that came out, I wanted it to be debated in the scientific community. So I waited. And in 2011 and 2012, it got debated. Because at that time, there was an UNFAO report saying that animal agriculture was responsible for 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So 18% and 51%, there's a wide gap. And the 51% was calculated by fixing the errors in the 18% report. So the people who wrote the 18% report, the UNFAO scientists, wrote a paper in the Animal Feed Science and Technology Journal arguing that Goodland and Anhang's calculations were incorrect. And then Goodland and Anhang refuted every one of the points made by the FAO scientists, point by point, in the same journal. And it was devastating. Okay? And the editor then asked the FAO scientists to continue the debate. He invited them to continue the debate, and they declined to continue the debate. This happened in 2012. And at that point in my mind, Goodland and Anhang's work was settled science. It was at least 51% of greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. And at that point, I wrote another letter to Mr. Gore saying that you have to talk about this. You cannot train thousands of people with the wrong information. And this time, he didn't want to even respond to me. Okay? So I had to walk out of the Climate Reality Project. And by that time, I was working on climate healers. So then I wrote a paper in 2019 saying that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 87% of greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. My number is bigger than everyone else's numbers because I was also counting the opportunity cost of the land that's currently being used for grazing animals. As Gerard Bisshop said, if we just give land back to nature and leave her alone, she'll fix the problem in 30 years. Okay? I'm pretty sure of that. My calculations are also showing exactly that. And then you have to count, okay, how is she going to fix the problem? She's going to start sequestering carbon every year. And you have to count that, because every year that we are consuming animals, we are saying we don't want the forest to come back. We don't want nature to heal the problem, solve the problem. So that is an opportunity cost. And as an engineer, as a systems engineer, I would be incompetent if I don't account for opportunity cost. And this is why I do it, you know. And when you count that, that provided 56% of the 87%. So I was using just 31% as direct emissions and 56% as opportunity cost. And that was based on the 5th assessment report of the UN IPCC. And with the 6th assessment report of the UN IPCC, I'm able to increase that to 118%. Because the 6th assessment report said that soil has 3.5 times as much carbon as vegetation. Soil underground carbon storage is not only soil carbon, but also root systems and so on, which roughly has the same amount of carbon as above ground vegetation. And when I calculated 56%, I was assuming that root systems store as much carbon as above ground vegetation, and then the soil around the root system stores just as much carbon as the root system alone. But it actually is 2.5 times as much carbon as the root system alone. So when you do that, it becomes 118%, which means that if we go vegan and we hold these corporations to account and basically take the power back from them, you know, this is our children, and it's basically a battle between children and corporations. And I say we have to get on the side of our children, not on the side of the corporations. So when we do that, I think Earth Day will become Earth Day forever. So happy Earth Day forever.
Sailesh, thank you so much for all the work you've done all these years. And you were the first person I met in this field after Glenn Mercer. And I appreciate all the knowledge you've shared with me. Erin, we have, it's kind of time to go to you. I wonder if you would mind if we just took 2 questions from the chat before we start with you.
Sure. Can everybody see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So if you want to, we had a question for Gerard. Let's see. Rebecca Allen is asking, does the statement forests absorb 90% of above ground carbon mean there is other absorption above the oceans is counted separately?
Yeah, I guess that's it's called the biosphere, and the vegetation. Well, it starts with the sun, that magical thing where carbon dioxide is drawn down into plants and fixed. That's photosynthesis. That's an incredible, magical thing. That's how carbon is drawn down by plants. In the oceans, carbon dioxide is soluble in water. So it's exchanged between every time a wave breaks, there's carbon dioxide, you know, sort of flowing in and out. So about a third of the extra in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, has been absorbed by the oceans, and it's eaten up by plankton and so on. And on the land, it's the vegetation that takes it in, which then makes it into soil carbon. So that's how it's sunk. But I'm not sure if that answers the question. In the biosphere, the forests hold 90% of the above ground carbon. The soil carbon changes, but very slowly. So it's all about changing the forests. If we want to get serious about climate change, it's all about forests. You know, this tinkering around with so-called regenerative grazing it's a nonsense. It's smoke and mirrors. There was a big report out of Oxford Uni that said it's smoke and mirrors. You can't have carbon neutral, regenerative grazing. It's nonsense. But they still do it, and it's still supported by a lot of people. And universities have masters programs that teach it, for God's sake. But it's all about forests. That's the future. If we can focus on forests, then we will stop this climate behemoth.
We had another question. How do we get into the churches and so-called spiritual centers? The Pope has been in the news, and I was raised Catholic. And when I first started Climate Diet, I wrote to the Pope and said he was working on his environmental encyclical in 2021. And I said, why don't we go back to Meatless Fridays? And you would get a huge change from the population going back to when I grew up, you did not eat meat on Fridays. But we didn't get actually any response from the Pope. So I think there were some other comments in there, but in the interest of our last speaker, my daughter, Erin, let's turn it over to Erin's cooking show. So we have about 15 minutes, Erin, is that enough?
Sure, we'll do it quickly.
Okay, great. And thanks everybody for being a part of this. And let's see, we still have a lot of people that are with us. Take it away, Erin.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you. And if you're still here, thank you for sticking around. This is the fun part of the show, right? Talking about food. If you're vegan, you're always thinking about what are you going to eat, browsing the menus. And I just want to comment on Dr. Sailesh Rao. He brought up such a good point. And I think it's really important that I sort of start with that, and then I'll go into what I'm making. But all plants contain all 9 essential amino acids. And we're right. We're taught in school that you get it from chicken, fish, beef, turkey, right? And you need the calcium from the milk. And it's so far from the truth. I'm going to show you right now how to make this super salad, which I make every day. And this salad has 34.4 grams of protein, and there is no animal products in it. So I start off with kale. I hope everybody can see. And kale can be a little tough. So I just spray some avocado oil or olive oil on it. And then you just massage it. That gets all that sort of kind of toughness out of it. And then you can also like tear it up into little pieces. So like kale's not hanging out of your teeth when you go to eat the salad, as it sometimes can. And another thing I like to do is a lot of different lettuce. So kale on its own already has over 2 grams of protein. So then if you add in, say, something like spinach, spinach has about 1 gram of protein. So now we're at 3. And again, you can keep massaging the kale and kind of pushing it, like kind of tearing it apart again. And then to help the absorption of iron on your greens, you're going to squeeze lemon. And that also helps with your dressing, right? But you're not adding a lot of calories or oil. And it just gives that, kind of dresses up the greens. Maybe if they were wilted a little bit, it helps liven them up a little bit. That's one of my favorite things to do. And then let's just go quickly down the road. And then if we have questions about any of this, please ask away. So then again, and all of this can be customizable to what you like. If you don't like spinach or kale, use arugula, use romaine, whatever you like. They all have protein in them. And then sprouts. Sprouts is a really big immune boosting superfood that I love. And there's so many different kinds, right? So now we've built our base sort of the salad. And I always put it in a big container and eat it with a spoon because it's always so much food. And then let's talk about some mushrooms and some broccoli. These are really high in protein too. Mushrooms, 1.2 grams for 1 mushroom. And broccoli is an interesting one too, 2 grams of protein. And broccoli per calorie has more protein than steak. So for people who are still like, how do you get your protein? I mean, it's not hard. This salad, again, has over 34 grams of protein. Now, in this particular recipe, I am using a little bit of raw romesco broccoli and regular broccoli and just some button mushrooms. But again, you can customize that. Then we've got some yellow pepper next. Any peppers are good. Peppers have, let's see how many protein grams. One. So 1 gram of protein there. Then I've got some carrots and some cauliflower. And carrots are so good because the vitamin C, and they boost your immunity, and they even help with controlling diabetes. And that is something that we hear a lot about in this country, right? Diabetes everywhere. And then I've got some cabbage. And I've just got a mixture of organic cabbage. And if you can, always organic, right? Less pesticides, things that we don't want that mess up our endocrine system and lead to inflammation and disease down the road. We want to stay away from that. Now, so far, I've got, I don't know, maybe about 9 things. Let's talk about one of my favorite parts, the beets. Beets are so good. Think of the color of beets, right? They're so nutritionally boosting for your blood, right? And believe it or not, beets have a little bit of protein in them too, 1.1 grams. And if you're an athlete, they help to improve your athletic performance. So beets are a really good powerhouse, and some sweet potato. And believe it or not, sweet potatoes have 2 grams of protein. So we're just loading up all the protein and all the nutrients. I talk a lot about nutrient dense foods when I work with my clients on their nutrition, because why do we want to waste calories on food that's not giving us anything, right? We want to feel good. We want to get that energy. We want to live longer. We want to live not just longer, but also healthy longer, right? Picking up our grandkids, being able to live on our own, not relying on sitting around all the time. So let's eat with vibrancy. And all of this is good for our bodies and the planet. Okay, so nutritional yeast, nooch. I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is, but if you don't, then you need to include it in your diet. It's a protein powerhouse. Nutritional yeast has 2.5 grams per tablespoon. So I put about 1 tablespoon on here. It has a little bit of a cheesy flavor, but not so strong that it would like take your salad in a weird direction. Trust me, I know I do this every day. And then ground flax seeds. Ground flax seeds have 1.5 per tablespoon. So we're just loading this salad up with many flavors, many nutrients, and you can change this around. And then Brazil nuts. So if you're vegan, sometimes you could be low in a nutrient called selenium, right? So one of the best ways to get selenium into your diet is through Brazil nuts. And you don't need a lot. They add a great crunch to your salad. And again, high in protein. Brazil nuts have 2 grams of protein. So you just sprinkle them on top of your salad to give you that crunch. And now lentils. So you can add any bean you want to your salad, but I particularly like lentils. They're one of my favorites and they're a powerhouse, right? Lentils have 8 grams of protein. So sprinkle them on your salad, or garbanzo beans or kidney beans, whatever you like. It can be, again, tailored to I like lentils though, because they sort of have a little spice to them. Not spicy, but just this peppery kind of flavor. So we can just sprinkle those on your salads. And then guess what's next? My favorite, avocado. I guess beets are probably my favorite, but a little avocado goes a long way. And guess what? Avocado has protein in it too, 1 gram. So we're going to sprinkle that on. And that kind of is what I do on a daily basis to get just one of my meals every day, like nutrient dense, powerhouse, loaded with protein, loaded with fiber. Getting that sweet potato in there too is the good carbs for you, right? And then let's talk about what we all like to talk about when we eat a salad, because people think, oh gosh, that's it? What about the dressing? Well, that's my favorite part, because my dressing is 3 ingredients: squeezable tahini, which you can order off of Amazon, organic. And tahini, believe it or not, has 8 grams of protein. So, and you don't need a lot because it's really creamy, it's dense, again, nutrient dense, right? And you're just going to squeeze it right onto your salad. You don't have to make a dressing that's separate. You can just kind of drizzle that on the top, maybe about a tablespoon. And then white balsamic vinegar is my favorite vinegar of choice. And again, you don't add any oil to this. You don't need to, because the squeezable tahini gives it the creaminess. I feel like gives it that, like, I feel like I'm eating something kind of decadent. And then my last thing is some organic maple syrup, and just a splash. And maple syrup is definitely lower on the glycemic index, sort of a better sweetener than anything else, I believe. And also date paste is good, and monk fruit. Those are better for you sweeteners. And then you just mix everything in, right? And now we've got ourselves this beautiful, colorful, high in antioxidants, high in protein, 34 grams of protein, and also like you're feeding your body like such good ingredients that you're gonna feel energized. And this is something I talk on a daily basis, because being vegan, people are so interested in what we're eating, right? What do you get? Where do you get your protein? How do you get your nutrients? What are you eating? And it's like it's a rainbow. You can eat anything and create some of these meals that I do on a daily basis that are just nourishing for not only your body, but longevity and nutrients and your skin health. We forget that that's our biggest organ. So what are we putting into our bodies? Staying hydrated is really important. So that's my little cooking demonstration. My big salad, I kind of do that on a daily basis, and I try to get my health coaching clients to do that too. Just really incorporating some really good nutrient dense foods into your diet on a daily basis is a good habit to create, right? So one of your meals every day could be something like this. And I always make it ahead of time the night before and just leave the dressing off to the next day. And I've got myself something prepared in the refrigerator that's good for me. It tastes great. And let's think about what that is doing to our climate, right? Less meat on our plates, but we're still getting great amount of protein and nutrients and fiber and full of vitamins. And that helps to remove the unwanted toxins in our body. So this is really important. So any questions anybody has, or if you need more of a recipe, certainly reach out to us in the chat and let us know. We can certainly circulate that around. Any questions anybody has for me, though? I would love a question.
Well, someone made a comment and they said, good reminder for me to buy more Brazil nuts.
Yes, Trader Joe's sells organic Brazil nuts. And again, they're high in selenium, and some plant-based humans like myself probably could be a little low in selenium. I would have to have that tested, but why not just eat 3 Brazil nuts every day and include it in your diet? It's a great way. It's a great amount, a good amount of protein, and it's really crunchy to add to a salad. And I just like Brazil nuts. They're great. And walnuts too. Walnuts is another one that I usually use. And walnuts are like the highest good for you omega-3s out of all of the nuts. So that's a really good tip too, right? If we're going to eat a big salad, let's make it as nutrient dense as we can and as high in protein as we can. And let's make it tasty. And no store-bought dressings. Have you ever looked at a store-bought dressing and seen the label? I mean, it's got, 18 ingredients. And can you pronounce those? So if you can't pronounce those, how does your body understand what to do with those ingredients, right? Let's make it easy. All of these things that I shared with you today are things that our body recognizes. And even just using that a little bit of maple syrup is really high in polyphenols and also really high in antioxidants, and it adds a little fun to your salad.
Well, Erin, someone wrote that their mouth is watering. That sounds absolutely delicious. And I'd like to just tell everyone that the reason her dad and my husband are vegans, so we started vegetarian. Erin bought us a book 2 decades ago called The China Study. And we read that book and you were already a vegan. And Erin practiced what she preaches. She created an energy bar, a vegan energy bar, and then she moved on to Good Mood Foods and why don't you talk about your new product? Erin?
Yeah, so this is my newest product. Is called the Good Mood Foods, and they are energy bites. They are 100% organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, wheat-free, dairy-free, soy-free, and they also contain organic ashwagandha and maca. And if you're not familiar with adaptogens, you should learn what they are and include them daily in your life. They really help with stress, anxiety, sleep, brain fog. And I like ashwagandha and maca because maca can give you a little bit of energy, but not like caffeine. It's very sustainable and you wouldn't feel like a caffeine jolt. And then ashwagandha is sort of, I call it the gateway into adaptogens. It's a really good adaptogen that I take on a daily basis, but that's also in my bites too. And I'm really proud of this product. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I had an energy bar out for a while, and I switched to the bites because I really noticed that I wasn't eating a whole bar sometimes. I would eat like a half a bar and there would only be these little pieces left over. So that's why I switched to the bites. And it's a great way to just incorporate a really good for you snack that's not sugary. Kids love it. It's dark chocolate and peanut butter. And again, fully loaded with protein, but like plant proteins and just good organic ingredients. So if you can read every ingredient, you know what they are, and it tastes good. So I feel like I'm really proud of this product. So my website is thegoodmoodfoods.com. So if you're interested to learn more, please visit us and follow us on Instagram at The Good Mood Foods. And again, if anybody wants the recipe for the salad, I can certainly send that out. And thank you guys for including me in this great event on Earth Day. Happy Earth Day.
Erin, I don't know if you want to put your website in the chat.
Sure. I can do that.
Well, this has been an incredible Earth Day, and thank you all to have such an amazing presentation from so many different people, contributing so many different aspects of the whole issue of what we eat and how we can make the planet a safer place for all of us and a place we can stay a lot longer. Let me see if any other questions came up. I think they were being asked in two different places. There we go. You have yours in. I think we're good unless any panelists want to add any last comments. Thank you, everybody. What a great panel. Happy Earth Day. And thanks to all of you who joined us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Chloe.